Islam and Judaism, twin faiths or ancient rivals? Two ancient paths, one divine source. Are they mirrors of shared truth or journeys destined to clash through history? From the deserts of Arabia to the hills of Judea, two of the world's greatest faiths trace their origins to a single divine call. Judaism, with its covenantal promise and centuries of law, ritual, and reflection, shaped the moral imagination of generations. Islam, emerging from the sands of Arabia centuries later, proclaims a renewed vision of divine guidance, claiming continuity with the prophets of old while offering a universal path towards submission to the One. At first glance, they appear intertwined: shared prophets, ethical commandments, and reverence for a singular God. Yet history has witnessed tension, rivalry, and misunderstanding, wars, theological disputes, and cultural divergences that seem to pull them apart. The challenge is not only historical but spiritual and psychological. How can two traditions, rooted in the same divine vision, traverse the same human dilemmas and yet sometimes appear in conflict? This exploration is a journey through scripture, history, philosophy, and human psychology. It examines the moral and spiritual frameworks of both faiths, the divine vision behind their laws, and the enduring lessons they offer. By tracing the ethical, historical, and theological threads connecting Islam and Judaism, we uncover the possibility of understanding, reflection, and perhaps even reconciliation, a cinematic and philosophical meditation on two paths shaped by the same divine source, yet experienced through different human lenses. In the quiet expanse of the ancient desert, where the wind carries whispers of eternity and the sun casts long, contemplative shadows, the story of divine covenant begins. Abraham stands at the center, a solitary figure beneath the vastness of the sky, listening to the call of God. The Quran and the Torah converge upon this moment, each narrative framing Abraham as the exemplar of submission, faith, and moral courage. In Judaism, he is Avraham, the patriarch of a covenantal people. In Islam, he is Ibrahim, the friend of God and the model of unwavering devotion. Both traditions celebrate his courage to step into the unknown, his willingness to sacrifice, and his faith in a promise that transcends human comprehension. From this singular root, two branches grow, shaped by divine guidance and human endeavor. Moses emerges from the burning bush, the Torah in his hands, a prophet chosen to convey God's law and moral vision. In cinematic imagination, one sees him descending Mount Sinai, tablets heavy with commandments yet luminous with divine purpose, each word a reflection of God's ethical and spiritual blueprint for humanity. The Quran reveres Moses as Musa, a prophet whose life and mission exemplify courage, guidance, and the struggle to align human society with divine will. The ethical, legal, and spiritual teachings he imparts resonate across time. Justice for the weak, mercy for the oppressed, integrity in action, and fidelity to God's command. The giving of law, halakha for Jews, sharia for Muslims, represents a covenantal framework, an invitation for humanity to engage with divine guidance. Law, ritual, and ethical precepts are not mere rules. They are instruments for shaping character, cultivating moral insight, and aligning human behavior with divine purpose. In cinematic vision, one imagines communities gathered in worship and reflection, navigating the tension between divine ideals and human frailty. The narrative of covenant is thus both historical and eternal, guiding hearts and minds toward moral clarity, spiritual reflection, and ethical action. Ethical imperatives form the backbone of these twin faiths. Justice, compassion, honesty, and mercy are universally emphasized, reflecting a shared understanding of human responsibility before the divine. Abraham's willingness to act, Moses' moral courage, and the prophets who follow them exemplify the integration of ethical insight and divine instruction. In cinematic imagery, one can see the unfolding of history, communities learning, debating, erring, and striving toward alignment with God's will. Human psychology intersects with divine command, revealing the eternal struggle between desire, understanding, and moral duty. The Quran situates Islam within this chain of prophecy, emphasizing continuity rather than rupture. Muhammad emerges as the final prophet, the seal of the prophets, whose mission is not to nullify what came before, but to restore clarity, moral integrity, and spiritual insight. In cinematic terms, one envisions him in the desert of Arabia, contemplating the revelation, the wind stirring the sand as a metaphor for divine inspiration sweeping through human hearts. His mission echoes Abraham's courage and Moses' law, to align humanity with the one God, to guide society toward justice, and to instill a moral consciousness capable of transcending tribal, cultural, and temporal divisions. Judaism, rooted in covenant and law, emphasizes the enduring responsibility of the people chosen to live by God's commandments. The Torah provides narrative, ritual, and ethical guidance. History offers both warning and inspiration. Cinematically, one sees the Israelites traversing wilderness and city, each act of obedience or disobedience shaping their moral landscape. The covenant is not static. It is lived, experienced, and tested across generations. Humans are invited to wrestle with divine command, internalize ethical precepts, and embody the moral vision of the prophets. The Quran, while affirming Jewish prophecy, emphasizes clarity of monotheism and the ethical dimensions of obedience. Prophets are exemplars, law is guidance, and ethical alignment is the measure of faith. Cinematically, one can imagine parallel visions. Moses receiving the tablets, Muhammad receiving revelation, Abraham confronting the divine command. Across centuries, these moments resonate in human conscience, each emphasizing the integration of spiritual insight, ethical reflection, and moral courage. The narrative of covenant is inseparable from human psychology. Faith is not merely assent to belief, but engagement with responsibility, reflection, and ethical choice. The Quran presents believers as active participants in divine guidance, accountable for moral action and ethical discernment. Similarly, Judaism emphasizes the lived experience of law, study, reflection, and communal responsibility. The cinematic lens captures communities deliberating, struggling, and striving, illustrating that divine guidance is not abstract, but operationalized in human life, action, and conscience. Prophetic continuity further binds these faiths. Moses, David, Solomon, and others represent the unfolding of divine moral vision, each contributing to a collective understanding of justice, mercy, and human responsibility. Muhammad completes this chain, emphasizing universal ethical principles, social justice, and spiritual alignment. The Quran situates Islam not as a rupture, but as a restoration and clarification, addressing human misunderstanding while honoring historical continuity. Cinematically, one sees the prophets as beacons, guiding humanity through the complexity of temporal life, illuminating moral and spiritual horizons with clarity and courage. The ethical resonance of both faiths manifests in ritual and practice. Prayer, fasting, charity, and justice are not merely acts of devotion. They are instruments for shaping moral character and aligning human behavior with divine intent. The cinematic imagination sees communities observing Sabbath or Jumu'ah, performing mitzvot or zakat, each act a reflection of inner alignment with ethical and spiritual principles. These practices reinforce continuity, communal responsibility, and personal moral growth, illustrating the profound intersection of divine command and human action. Historically, the paths of Judaism and Islam have intertwined, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in tension. Cultural, political, and social factors have shaped perception, encounter, and conflict. Yet at the core lies a shared recognition of divine guidance, moral responsibility, and human aspiration. Cinematically, one imagines cities, deserts, and courts as stages where divine principles meet human endeavor, where prophets' messages challenge, inspire, and illuminate ethical life. Ethical imperatives transcend historical contingency. Justice, mercy, honesty, courage, and submission to the divine are as relevant today as in the ancient deserts. Abraham, Moses, and Muhammad become archetypes, mirrors for human conscience, guides for moral action, and symbols of ethical alignment with divine will. Cinematic reflection captures their journeys: quiet contemplation in solitude, public teaching among crowds, confrontation with human failings, all forming a continuous narrative of moral and spiritual instruction. In philosophy, the covenant represents the intersection of divine intent and human agency. God's command is absolute, yet humans are responsible agents capable of understanding, reflection, and ethical choice. Islam and Judaism converge in this vision. Divine guidance shapes human morality, law structures ethical life, and prophets model the integration of ethical reflection with action. Cinematically, one sees this tension and harmony in human faces, gestures, and choices, illustrating that faith is a lived, ethical, and spiritual journey. Ultimately, Part 1 illuminates that Islam and Judaism, though historically divergent in ritual and theology, share a foundational commitment to divine guidance, ethical responsibility, and moral reflection. Abraham's courage, Moses' law, and Muhammad's final guidance exemplify the continuity of moral and spiritual vision. Cinematically, the narrative spans deserts, cities, and generations, revealing that the covenant is both historical and eternal, guiding human conscience, shaping ethical life, and inspiring reflection on the moral and spiritual potential of humanity. The twin roots of these faiths, covenant and prophecy, form the basis for ethical understanding, spiritual reflection, and human responsibility. Each prophet, law, and teaching is a thread in a vast tapestry of divine guidance, illustrating that ethical alignment, moral courage, and spiritual insight are the ultimate goals of revelation. Through cinematic imagination, one sees the interplay of human endeavor, divine instruction, and historical unfolding, creating a narrative both timeless and immediate. The covenant is thus not a relic of the past but a living principle. Abraham, Moses, and Muhammad speak across centuries, reminding humanity that faith is action, ethics is divine reflection, and spiritual insight demands moral courage. In every generation, believers confront ethical dilemmas, internalize moral lessons, and strive to align human action with divine intent. Judaism and Islam, twin faiths emerging from the same root, invite reflection on continuity, divergence, and the eternal dialogue between God and humanity. The journey from shared covenant to divergent practice is as much human as it is divine. The desert wind that carried the revelations to Abraham, Moses, and Muhammad now whispers across centuries, echoing in synagogues and mosques, reminding humanity that faith is both continuity and choice. Ritual, law, and historical circumstance have shaped Judaism and Islam into distinct expressions of the same divine vision, each responding to human frailty, cultural context, and spiritual aspiration. Law is the most visible manifestation of this divergence. Halakha, the Jewish system of law, intricately binds daily life to divine command, offering precise guidance on ethical, ritual, and social matters. Sharia, the Islamic system, while similarly rooted in divine instruction, emphasizes submission to God's will and moral responsibility in both personal and communal life. Cinematically, one sees families observing Sabbath in Jerusalem, studying Torah with meticulous care, while in Medina or Cairo, Muslims gather for Salah, fast during Ramadan, and give zakat, their actions reflecting the living command of God. Both systems seek to cultivate moral character, social justice, and spiritual awareness. Yet they interpret divine will through different lenses shaped by historical, cultural, and theological factors. Ritual further illustrates divergence. Jewish prayer, sacrifice, and festivals are oriented toward communal memory and covenantal identity, recalling liberation from Egypt, the giving of the Torah, and the covenant with God. Islamic ritual, daily prayers, fasting, pilgrimage, reorients believers towards submission, ethical alignment, and remembrance of God's mercy. Cinematically, one imagines the contrasting rhythms, the cadence of Hebrew liturgy, the echo of the call to prayer across the desert, both invoking the divine, yet sculpting human conscience in distinct ways. Ritual becomes a mirror, reflecting each community's understanding of God, humanity, and moral responsibility. Theological divergence is also profound. Judaism maintains the indivisible unity of God, emphasizing covenant with a chosen people, yet interprets prophecy as guidance within history. Islam emphasizes absolute monotheism, Tawhid, the universality of prophetic guidance, and the finality of Muhammad's mission. While both traditions share reverence for the same prophets and ethical principles, interpretation of divinity, the role of prophecy, and historical responsibility differs. Cinematically, one can visualize Abraham receiving divine command, Moses descending Sinai, Muhammad contemplating revelation, each moment distinct yet connected, highlighting the continuum of guidance and the divergence of interpretation. Historical tensions between Judaism and Islam have further shaped perception and practice. In medieval Spain, Muslims and Jews coexisted, scholars exchanging knowledge, producing philosophical and scientific innovations. In other contexts, political rivalry, conquest, and misunderstanding fostered mistrust, persecution, and conflict. Cinematically, one can imagine cities like Cordoba and Baghdad, centers of learning and cultural flourishing, yet also arenas of contestation and power struggle. These historical realities demonstrate that divergence is not merely theological, but deeply human, shaped by context, ambition, and circumstance. Ethical convergence persists amid divergence. Justice, mercy, honesty, and social responsibility are central in both traditions. Even when ritual and law diverge, the human conscience is called to align with divine expectation. Cinematically, one sees communities acting to aid the poor, judge fairly, and cultivate virtue, each interpreting divine command through the lens of their tradition. Both faiths teach that moral action is inseparable from spiritual reflection, that law without ethical insight becomes hollow, and that ritual without conscience becomes performative. Interpretation of Scripture has played a pivotal role in divergence. The Torah, rich in narrative, law, and ethical teaching, offers guidance interpreted by rabbinic tradition across centuries. The Quran, while affirming earlier prophets, provides clarity on monotheism, submission, and moral responsibility, interpreted through tafsir and jurisprudence. Cinematically, one can visualize scholars in study halls, debating, reflecting, and codifying understanding, illustrating that divergence arises not only from divine instruction, but also from human cognition, culture, and the quest to render the infinite intelligible. Social and political realities further reinforce divergence. Judaism, often a minority tradition, developed laws and rituals sustaining identity, community cohesion, and ethical integrity. Islam, emerging in Arabia and rapidly expanding, emphasized universal guidance, social justice, and governance aligned with divine law. Cinematically, one sees tribes, cities, and empires as stages where faith interacts with politics, shaping communal norms, law, and ethical imagination. These historical contingencies deepened divergence, yet the ethical and spiritual core remained a shared reflection of divine guidance. The divergence of law and ritual underscores human agency. Both traditions emphasize obedience and submission, yet each interprets divine guidance through context, reflection, and communal consensus. Human psychology interacts with revelation, fear, hope, devotion, and ethical aspirations shape ritual observance and legal interpretation. Cinematically, one imagines individuals wrestling with conscience, families embodying tradition, and communities balancing historical fidelity with contemporary reality. The moral and spiritual narrative unfolds not in isolation, but in dynamic human experience. Ethical and philosophical reflection offers further insight. Despite divergence, the twin faiths converge on key principles: the sanctity of life, justice for the oppressed, care for the vulnerable, and the cultivation of moral character. Divergence in ritual and law reflects different pathways toward the same goal: alignment with divine will, ethical action, and spiritual growth. Cinematically, one envisions parallel journeys: Jewish families observing mitzvot, Muslim communities performing salah, both sculpting character and conscience through daily practice. Historical tensions illuminate the stakes of divergence. Misunderstanding, political rivalry, and theological rigidity have fueled mistrust. Yet when approached with reflection and empathy, divergence becomes a source of ethical insight and interfaith dialogue. Cinematically, one sees scholars, leaders, and communities engaging across boundaries, translating law and ritual into shared moral principles, revealing that human understanding of divine guidance is both contested and collaborative. Theologically, divergence invites contemplation of the nature of God, covenant, and human responsibility. Judaism emphasizes the covenantal bond between God and a people, guiding behavior, law, and communal identity. Islam emphasizes submission to God's singular will, universality of prophetic guidance, and moral alignment as the path to spiritual integrity. Cinematically, prophets stand as beacons, illuminating ethical life, guiding communities, and modeling moral courage. Divergence in interpretation becomes less a rupture than a reflection of human engagement with the infinite. In ritual, law, and history, the twin paths reveal the complexity of human response to divine guidance. Each faith has cultivated a rich tapestry of practice, reflection, and moral imagination. The cinematic sweep of centuries captures deserts, cities, courts, and study halls where belief, law, and human conscience intersect. Divergence emerges naturally from context, culture, and interpretation, yet convergence persists in ethical ideals, moral responsibility, and spiritual aspiration. Ultimately, Part 2 demonstrates that divergence between Judaism and Islam is neither accidental nor merely oppositional. It is the natural expression of human engagement with divine guidance. Law, ritual, and history shape perception and practice, while ethics, reflection, and conscience maintain a shared moral horizon. Abraham, Moses, and Muhammad remain central figures, illustrating that covenant, prophecy, and divine instruction continue to guide humanity through the complexities of life, culture, and moral decision-making. In cinematic imagination, the twin paths wind across deserts and cities, across history and conscience. One sees the continuity of ethical vision, the divergence of ritual and law, and the enduring human struggle to align action with divine will. Judaism and Islam, though distinct in expression, share a foundation in covenant, prophecy, and ethical aspiration, revealing that divergence is both a challenge and a canvas for human moral and spiritual growth. This tension between unity and divergence, ritual and law, history and moral conscience sets the stage for reflection in Part 3. The search for understanding, reconciliation, and shared ethical insight. The ways in which these twin faiths, while distinct, illuminate the path towards spiritual and moral alignment with the one God. Across the sweep of history, the paths of Islam and Judaism, while divergent in law, ritual, and theology, continue to converge in their ethical vision, spiritual aspiration, and human relevance. The human heart, with its yearning for understanding, justice, and moral alignment, remains the ultimate stage where covenant, prophecy, and divine guidance intersect. In cinematic imagination, one sees a desert at dusk, Abraham standing beneath the stars, Moses descending Sinai with tablets in hand, Muhammad contemplating revelation in solitude, a symbolic convergence of guidance across centuries, cultures, and human hearts. The ethical horizon forms the first bridge between these twin faiths. Both Judaism and Islam emphasize justice, compassion, mercy, and honesty as reflections of divine intent. Human beings are called to translate belief into action, ritual into moral conscience, law into ethical life. Cinematically, one imagines streets and communities where believers enact these principles, helping the oppressed, judging fairly, acting courageously, and embodying humility. Despite divergence in ritual observance or jurisprudential interpretation, the moral core of these traditions illuminates the shared aspiration of aligning human life with the divine will. Spiritual reflection offers another point of convergence. In Judaism, study of Torah and engagement with divine law cultivate contemplation, awareness, and moral insight. In Islam, reflection upon the Quran, remembrance of God, and submission to divine guidance cultivate similar spiritual maturity. The cinematic vision captures scholars and lay people alike in moments of reflection, their gestures, postures, and concentration embodying the internalization of divine guidance. The human heart becomes both mirror and canvas, reflecting divine wisdom while shaping moral and ethical action. Interfaith understanding emerges as a practical application of this convergence. Historical conflicts, political rivalries, and theological disagreements have often overshadowed ethical and spiritual commonalities. Yet when approached with reflection and empathy, divergence becomes a source of insight rather than separation. Cinematically, one sees scholars, communities, and leaders engaging across boundaries, translating ritual and law into shared moral and spiritual lessons. Dialogue transforms historical tension into a living encounter, where understanding, ethical clarity, and spiritual insight illuminate common human aspiration. Human psychology explains much of both divergence and convergence. Faith is not only belief, but an exercise in moral responsibility, ethical discernment, and spiritual reflection. Fear, hope, devotion, and conscience shape how humans engage with divine guidance. Judaism and Islam both recognize the struggle inherent in aligning human desire with ethical and spiritual ideals. Cinematic imagination evokes individuals wrestling with temptation, communities deliberating moral dilemmas, and hearts striving toward courage, mercy, and wisdom, illustrating that the covenant is lived in both personal and communal human experience. Ritual and law, while distinct, converge ethically. Both traditions guide human behavior, cultivate moral character, and shape social cohesion. Halakha and Sharia, though divergent in practice, serve the same ultimate purpose: to align human life with divine will, to cultivate conscience, and to create a moral and ethical society. Cinematically, one envisions parallel actions: a Jewish family observing Sabbath, a Muslim community performing Salah. Each gesture a tangible reflection of devotion, ethical commitment, and spiritual alignment. The twin paths, though divergent in form, mirror each other in purpose. Historical reflection reveals that understanding and reconciliation are possible. Across centuries, Jews and Muslims have shared cities, scholarship, and culture. In medieval Spain, Baghdad, and Cairo, dialogue and cooperation flourished, demonstrating that human ingenuity, ethical insight, and shared spiritual values can transcend divergence. Cinematic imagery evokes libraries, study halls, marketplaces, and mosques where learning, reflection, and moral collaboration exemplify the ethical bridge between these faiths. Historical tension becomes both lesson and opportunity for insight, reminding humanity that difference need not become division. Philosophically, the convergence lies in the recognition that unity in ethical and spiritual pursuit transcends doctrinal disagreement. God's command is absolute. Human engagement is complex. Judaism and Islam both invite reflection, obedience, and ethical action as the means to approach divine will. The cinematic imagination captures moments of choice, acts of mercy, ethical courage, devotion and solitude, communal justice, all illustrating that faith is realized in the alignment of heart, mind, and action. Divergence in law and ritual is an expression of human creativity in responding to divine guidance, while convergence in ethics and spiritual aspiration reveals shared human destiny. The human heart becomes the ultimate arbiter and bridge. Faith is lived, internalized, and enacted. In both traditions, the measure of devotion is not ritual alone, but ethical integrity, moral courage, and spiritual reflection. Cinematically, the narrative captures quiet moments of conscience, reflection before action, and the moral weight of choice. The heart, shaped by covenant, prophecy, and divine guidance, reflects the universal call to justice, mercy, and alignment with the One. Ethics and spirituality intersect in the lived experience of believers. Acts of charity, justice, and mercy are not only expressions of faith, but reflections of the internalization of divine instruction. The cinematic sweep illustrates generations, communities, and individuals, each enacting the covenant in diverse circumstances, demonstrating that the core purpose of both faiths is moral and spiritual formation. Divergent paths converge in lived experience, teaching that human engagement with the divine is both universal and particular, communal and personal. Ultimately, understanding requires humility, reflection, and ethical imagination. Judaism and Islam, though distinct in law, ritual, and historical trajectory, illuminate complementary aspects of human engagement with God. Their shared ethical principles, reverence for prophets, and commitment to moral action offer a framework for interfaith reflection and collaboration. Cinematically, the image is timeless. Abraham beneath the stars, Moses descending Sinai, Muhammad contemplating revelation, all pointing toward the human heart as the site of alignment, reflection, and moral courage. Unity in diversity is the ultimate lesson. By recognizing ethical and spiritual convergence, believers are invited to transcend polemic, celebrate moral insight, and engage with human and divine purpose responsibly. Difference becomes a source of reflection, tension a catalyst for ethical clarity, and divergence an opportunity to understand the breadth of divine guidance. The cinematic narrative stretches across deserts, cities, and generations, revealing that covenant, prophecy, and moral aspiration endure beyond time, culture, and circumstance. In conclusion, the twin faiths, Islam and Judaism, demonstrate that divergence in law, ritual, and theology need not preclude ethical and spiritual unity. Abraham, Moses, and Muhammad remain eternal exemplars of courage, submission, and moral vision. Their stories illuminate the human heart, the moral and spiritual imagination, and the capacity for reflection, dialogue, and alignment with divine guidance. Cinematically, one sees the convergence of paths not in uniformity, but in purpose. The cultivation of justice, mercy, ethical integrity, and spiritual insight. The human heart, shaped by reflection, ritual, and moral action, becomes the bridge between faiths. Judaism and Islam, in all their historical ritual and theological diversity, converge in their call to ethical living, spiritual alignment, and moral courage. The cinematic sweep of centuries, communities, and individuals illustrates that unity is found not in dogmatic uniformity, but in shared ethical aspiration and spiritual reflection. In the end, the twin faiths teach that the covenant is lived in human action, that divergence is an invitation to reflection, and that the human heart is both the site and source of reconciliation, understanding, and ethical alignment. Through reflection, study, and moral courage, believers can navigate difference without losing sight of the shared moral horizon, illuminating the timeless bridge between Judaism and Islam, between law and conscience, between humanity and the divine.